Has Pakistan's plan to deport 1.7 million Afghan refugees flopped? We asked this because as the clock ticked and approached the November 1 deadline, only about 130,000 Afghans left the country since Islamabad ordered them to leave at the start of October. And now the remaining Afghans living in Pakistan face the threat of detention and deportation at the hands of the Pakistani authorities. Today, as the deadline expired, arrests have reportedly been made across Pakistan's 4 provinces, Islamabad saying that the sweep is part of its new anti-migrant crackdown. Pakistan authorities are targeting all undocumented or unregistered foreigners, and that mainly affects Afghans. Pakistan authorities began to open dozens of holding centers across the country, some with the capacity to detain several thousands. They have started processing Afghans ahead of the mass deportations. The Pakistan government saying that it has already started the repatriations of those who had not already left. Pakistan's Interior Minister confirming this on Twitter, or platform X as it's now called. But why is Pakistan ordering the deportations is the immediate question. Islamabad has justified its decision to expel undocumented migrants by blaming them for its security crisis. Remember, the country is facing rising militancy and economic crisis and souring ties with the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan. And these are the reasons driving Pakistan's mass evictions. While the Pakistan government claims that the expulsions are necessary to protect its welfare and security, critics say the Afghan refugees are being unfairly punished. They are being punished because of the strained ties between the government in Islamabad and the rulers of Kabul. It's not just us saying that. Listen into what the Afghans who were leaving Pakistan yesterday had to say.
We are helpless. We have nothing in our homeland, no home, nowhere to go. For the past 2 days, we have been waiting here, but no one is doing anything about our crossing over. What should we do? Now that we have come here, we should at least be allowed to cross over.
I had my own business in Karachi. I left it. I sold all my stuff and I'm leaving with that money. Everything else was confiscated. I was arrested by the police a day ago and released on a payment of 6,000 rupees. They are arresting people and releasing them on payment of money. The situation is very bad.
We lived nearly 40 years in Pakistan, but they did not accept us, not given us any documents so we can stay. As you can see, hundreds of families in these trucks are going back to Afghanistan, and we are gathered here at the Torkham border. Some of these families are going to Kabul, some to Jalalabad, and some Kunar. But the disappointing thing for us is that they should have given us at least 1 year. Due to this short time of only 1 month, we sold our properties at very cheap prices. Now we are on our way to Afghanistan and winter is coming and there will be no work for us there.
Lines of refugees with luggage in their hands and on top of the vehicles could be seen at the bus terminal yesterday. They crammed into trucks and buses heading towards the border hours before the expiration of the deadline. Meanwhile, the Taliban authorities in Afghanistan appealed for more time for the refugees. They said that around 60,000 Afghans have returned between the 23rd of September to the 22nd of October from Pakistan. And ironically, the Taliban called Pakistan's deportation order cruel and barbaric. They urged Pakistan to give undocumented Afghans in the country more time to leave, with bottlenecks of returnees forming at the border crossings. Pakistan's order has drawn widespread criticism from UN agencies, rights groups as well. Human Rights Watch on Tuesday, in fact, accused Pakistan of resorting to threats, abuse and detention to force Afghan asylum seekers to return to Afghanistan. It had appealed for Pakistani authorities to drop the deadline and work with the UN Refugee Agency to register those without papers. Remember, the situation in Afghanistan remains dangerous for many who fled, and this deportation further exposes them to dangers, including threats to their lives. Pakistan is not a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention, and it has no domestic legal framework for refugees. And this makes migrants and refugees there vulnerable to the changing policies. But the Pakistan government is paying little attention to these concerns. You see, this has to do with sending out a message to the Taliban. The refugees are just a tool in this game. Pakistan has a range of demands from the Taliban, including acting against its Pakistani offshoot, the Tehreek-e-Taliban, or the TTP. The terror group is behind a host of attacks against the Pakistan forces for the past 1 year, and the TTP's targeted attacks on Pakistani soil continue to grow. The TTP finding safe haven in Afghanistan, even though Pakistan has repeatedly called for the Taliban to stop supporting the TTP, its appeals have gone unheard. And now we have this situation in hand, a situation that essentially threatens to become a human rights catastrophe. Pakistan is mounting a campaign of harassment, of intimidation against the Afghan refugees to teach the Taliban a lesson. And the anti-immigrant witch hunt, so to say, is being carried out by a caretaker government. But will this decision really help Pakistan, or will the Afghan exodus from Pakistan turn catastrophic without urgent aid? Have you ever noticed the sign, wanted salesperson but female only? Have you wondered why women are preferred for some jobs? If you have, then here's the 3-word answer for you: objectification of women. But isn't it time that stops? Unfortunately, the world of sport is also not immune to it. In fact, sports associations and the cultures surrounding them enforce the policing of female bodies manifested through sexist uniforms. They are designed to present women in a way that appeals to the male gaze and regrettably takes place at all levels of sports. 2 United Airlines flight attendants are suing the airline over allegations that they were prevented from working on flights chartered by the Los Angeles Dodgers baseball team because they did not fit a certain look, quote unquote, of being white, young, thin, blonde and blue-eyed. The applicants in their lawsuit asserted that they were overlooked for and eventually removed from such flights in favor of female staff who were young and thin. The history and evolution of female tennis uniforms is yet another example of how women have been appreciated for their femininity or their sexuality rather than their athletic competence since they first entered the sports arena. And a well-known example of this is when Serena Williams wore a Nike catsuit during the 2018 French Open, which was met with outrage, while she technically did not break the dress code. The French Tennis Federation president, in an interview with a tennis magazine, declared that it will no longer be accepted and one must respect the game and the place. In fact, the sexualization of women in sports and telling them what to do runs far deeper than the claim that sex sells. The marginalization of female athletes or workers is not just a product of what happens on the playing field or the workplace, but it's also linked to how we view those on the field or the court or the pitch. Should governments kill the old people to save the young? Here's the scenario: a sudden pandemic, crisis escalating into a national crisis, and suddenly the world is trapped in a plague. Scientists are working furiously to find a remedy, a medicine. What does a government do? Well, be sure to not ask Boris Johnson. The former Prime Minister of Britain took a decision. Let the old die. The Wuhan virus, he said, was nature's way of dealing with the old. Of course, with the one exception, that's himself. Johnson himself is 59 years old and was 3 years younger when COVID-19 scared the world to death. Not all that young then, I'm sure you will agree with me. He got COVID-19 and was near death, but the country's best medical resources were wheeled to save his life. And when it came to helping others of his age and older, Boris Johnson decided to walk down the path of ageism. He thought the Wuhan virus was nature's way of dealing with old people. Let me say that again. COVID-19 being nature's way of dealing with old people. Can you believe that? In other words, if the old fall sick, let them. If they die, let them. The Conservative Party's chief whip, Mark Spencer, reportedly agreed. He suggested that the government should let the old people get COVID-19 and protect others. And how do we know this? Meet Sir Patrick Vallance. He served as the British government's chief scientific advisor between April 2018 and April 2023. He was in office when COVID-19 struck. Sir Patrick detailed his frustration of dealing with the Johnson government during the pandemic in his diary. And in one of the diary entries, Sir Patrick Vallance wrote that Johnson was quote-unquote obsessed with older people accepting their fate and letting the young get on with life and economy going. And things did not go as Johnson had desired. Johnson himself came down with COVID-19. The UK had one of the highest COVID-19 death tolls in the world. And today, Johnson and his cabinet are facing a COVID-19 inquiry. Grim and disturbing details are coming out of that probe, and Johnson is receiving a lot of flack for his comments. There is no doubt that Johnson's statements are problematic. But he and his chief whip would not be the first ones to propose that the old sacrifice or be sacrificed for the sake of the young. How many of you recognize this man? He is Dan Patrick, the Lieutenant Governor of Texas. In March 2020, he gave a very interesting interview to Fox News. Patrick suggested that grandparents and senior citizens should be willing to die from the Wuhan virus for the sake of the young, for the sake of the economy. Let me read out an excerpt from that interview. Patrick asks, and I'm quoting, "As a senior citizen, are you willing to take a chance on your survival in exchange for keeping the America that all America loves for your children and grandchildren? And if that is the exchange, I'm all in," quote unquote. And this again was in the middle of the pandemic. COVID-19 surely exposed the indifference, the heartless indifference towards the elderly. It is fair to say right away that this was not how most countries and their leaders reacted during the crisis. For India and for most other countries, every life was equally precious. The dilemma is, to use an expression, age-old. How many of you have read Christopher Buckley's Boomsday? It's a satirical novel, and in it, baby boomers, as in those born between 1948 and 1964, are paid cash up front if they commit to being killed when they reach the age of 75. Why? Healthcare is not free. I mean, it may be free for you if you are a taxpayer in a first world country, but medicine and medical procedures cost money, and that money is borne by you if you go to a private healthcare facility. If you choose a government one, like in the case of the UK, the NHS, then the government pays your medical bill. And where does the government get that money from? The taxes. Taxes that the working population pays, taxes that employees pay. But here's the thing, people are not employed all their life. They start working between the age of, say, 20 to 25, and they retire at 65, approximately. And what happens after that? This age group becomes a liability for the government. The government pays their pension, spends on their healthcare, and as people age, the cost of their healthcare increases as well. They need special care. They need caregiving. In other words, they become a public cost, just to put this out bluntly. In countries like Japan, where over 28% of the population is over the age of 50, or Italy, where the number is 22%, this is a huge problem. And here the number of people drawing pensions is slowly catching up to the number of people paying taxes. It is an economic disaster in the making. But does the solution to this problem lie in killing the old? Surely more prime ministers than Johnson would have thought about it when sitting through a briefing on the state of the economy. In Finland, 21% of its population is above the age of 65. Same as Portugal, Greece, Germany, Bulgaria. But killing the old cannot be the solution here. We humans are not barbaric. At least that is what we would like to believe. So, Boris Johnson and company, next time you are faced with a similar problem, think of intelligent and sustainable ideas. Think person reform, encourage silver economy, modernize insurance systems. We will leave the dear British leaders with a thought from Mahatma Gandhi. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. When the virus from China struck, Great Britain's value system collapsed.